Get in the know. Non-stop Vikings talk. It's Purple Daily on Score North and ScoreNorth.com.
All right, Purple Daily on draft every Monday right here on the Purple Daily YouTube channel. Tyler Fornes, Miles Gorham, Declan Goff here to take you through another edition of Purple Daily on draft. We've compiled some comments and questions mostly on the defensive side of the ball and specifically the defensive line area of the football where the Vikings are very weak and they're very thin. A lot of question marks going forward. So we've had a lot of kind of meat and potatoes questions on this position on the regular episodes of Purple Daily, so why not bring this theme also over to Purple Daily on draft? And we have about 4 questions here from listeners that I'm excited to spring onto Tyler and Miles to kind of get their thoughts on that position. Plus, we'll get into a mock draft from Tyler that he did at Vikings Wire. So hit that subscribe button, Daily Vikings Entertainment, on the Purple Daily podcast feed and YouTube channel. All right, so let's start off with this one here. Shannon wants to know, for the PDOD crew, I would love to hear Tyler and Miles discuss defensive tackle candidates in the 2024 draft that could potentially be plug and play to help the defensive line. So like Jaquan Roy was a nice little rookie they had last year, and maybe he gets more minutes or more playing time, I should say, this coming season. But Forno, are there any defensive tackles, and it's not always a sexy position to take right away, but are there plug-and-play guys that the Vikings could grab that you would have your eyes on this early in the draft process?
There's one that I absolutely love, and he's a big boy, and he's every year I do the All-Forno team. It's just my favorite players in this draft, and Devondre Sweat, the defensive lineman from Texas, has already grabbed a spot. He's 6'4", 362 pounds, and he moves way better than you might think for a guy that size. We're not talking Jordan Davis type athleticism, but we're talking very good for his size, and the motor is nice as well. What I really liked about him was that there's a nice power punch in his hands. It worries me a little bit with nose tackles who get up towards 6'4", and he has this issue as well. Plays a little too high with his pad level, and I'd like to see him utilize leverage a little bit better and get lower. But sometimes he's 362. How low can you expect him to get? So you almost have to just kind of deal with it. But with how the Vikings want to play defense, you need that 2-gapper at nose. Harrison Smith played admirably well out of position. I want to slide him over to a 3-tech, a 5-tech, and let him do things that are a little bit more natural to him. What's really interesting about Sweat, he looks like he should be a 0-tech, a true 2-gapper. That's not exactly what he played at Texas. Most of his snaps were a 3 technique where you're playing in a single gap. That's how that Texas defense front really wanted to play. They had good players on the second and third levels to be able to come up and fit runs. So you almost have to work with him a little bit to really feel comfortable as that 2-gap player. But when you watch him, he can handle double teams. He can stack and shed blocks. He can do a lot of the things you want in the running game. And he's not a complete liability in the passing game as well. He has a 10% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. It's pretty good for a 362-pound nose. So you'd be able to plug and play him. I don't know how many snaps you'd be able to play him for because he's such a large human. But if you could get him on the field for, 40 to 50% of the snaps, I think you can make a really big impact.
Miles, how about you? Because obviously, there's a lot of holes in this defensive team, on this defense and on the Vikings in general, and defensive edge seems to obviously be another one that people are talking about. But these defensive tackles, these nose tackles and whatnot, could you see the Vikings taking one in the first round of the draft? And is that something that you would be okay with if the Vikings end up having to do so?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to see them take a nose tackle in the first round, but they need one. Like to Forno's point. And I love the Texas boys in general. Byron Murphy the second too. Like both of those guys are legit players in this draft. And both guys could fit with his Vikings defense needs on the defensive line. But yeah, I definitely think I could see them going defensive end, edge rusher in the first round if they don't go quarterback. And I'm trying to get myself out of the mindset like it might not be it can't just always be quarterback in my mind. We got to think other options too, because it's so easy, at least for me, to just want to focus on quarterback, go trade up, go all these different scenarios. But defensive line is obviously the biggest, in my opinion, biggest need on defense. Harrison Phillips is the only guy coming back that is probably worth having trust in 2024 and beyond, or even just for 2024. He's the only guy coming back under contract that you're like, hey, he has a solidified role. But he shouldn't be playing 900 plus snaps There's no way that should be happening. And I think that I love the idea of moving him and shifting him over to play a little bit more of that like edge 5-tech role on this defense, just because he is more of a like traditional 3-tech than a nose tackle for how he plays, but he's not like a true pass rusher either. So I think they need to find that guy that kind of gives them that balance, that guy that can help stuff the gap, but also against the run, but also can get to the quarterback. And they need somebody that can create that interior pressure. So yeah, if they can find that guy early in the draft, I'm all for it, because that's a disruptor. They need a disruptor in the middle, and they don't have it right now. They have guys that can function and they can play well, and I think they showed throughout the season that they were pretty good at. They eventually got better at stopping the run. That Eagles game, take that one out of the way, because that doesn't count. We don't want to count that one. But other than that, I think they did a pretty good job overall of defending the run, and I think they were able to find that like mesh point with Brian Flores. But they definitely need that guy that can be a true disruptor. You know, we have it within the division. Kenny Clark. You have guys like that. We had to go against who's the Bears guy for so long. Who am I thinking?
Akeem Nicks.
Akeem Hicks, thank you. Akeem Hicks for so long. Like guys like that, they're just disruptors in both against the run and rushing the passer. The Vikings just haven't had that guy since like Sharif Floyd, Kevin Williams. You know, Pat Williams too, but Linval Joseph was really good at that as well. Mm-hmm. He's a guy that you could really plug and play. And he played more snaps than you probably would have liked him to, but he was just so good. The Vikings just haven't had that kind of guy in a long time, so would really love to see them find that guy this offseason, whether it's in the draft or somehow in free agency.
So, Forno, this listener is named Tyler, so forgive me on my Tylers that I'm getting confused here, but Tyler wants to know, would you be able to talk about the guys on PDOD about the defensive, would you guys be able to talk about the defensive tackle out of Texas, Tivandre Sweat, and what they think of him? He's 6'4", almost 350 pounds. He's an absolute mammoth of a man in the middle of the currently small defensive line for the Vikings, and he's looking like an early day 2 pick. Putting you on the spot, Forno. Have you watched any tape or have you watched any Texas ball with Tivandre Sweat, and what do you think of him as a prospect for the Vikings?
Well, I don't know if you listened to my first segment, Declan, but that's all I talked about is Tivandre Sweat.
Yeah, I was going to say, guy. We just went like 5
wrong
minutes.
One. Sweat's the man. I think he's the guy that you take in round 2 and you don't think twice. Not sexy, but sometimes you just have to eat your vegetables. I will say, though, to kind of add on, I would prefer the Vikings not have to take a defensive lineman, because they use free agency to fortify the position, and they fixed it there. A guy like Christian Wilkins. Sometimes you just have to spend on a player that you don't have. And that's what free agency is for. Free agency is for fixing needs. The draft is about acquiring the best talent. And I would prefer that the Vikings don't have to go into the draft with a big need at defensive line, because they've already taken care of it.
This is where highlighting and deleting the comments when I'm done with them comes into handy, and I forgot to do it on this one. So I already talked about Tivandre Sweat. We still
answered your question.
We did, though. We acknowledged Tyler's question. At the very least, we added that into the new layer of Tivandre Sweat. Miles, so we kind of went over some defensive line targets today on Purple Daily as well. Do you see them spending a lot of money? Like, let's take Hunter out of the equation here just for a second. Do you see them spending big money on a defensive tackle? Like, do you see them trying to figure out the way in free agency to get that? Or is it better to probably maybe not have to overspend it in free agency and maybe just identify it in the draft?
I definitely think they'll find a way to add at least another body within free agency, probably within the realm that we've seen from the Kwesi Adofo-Mensah regime so far, is in that like mid-tier range. I don't think they're going to go out. Christian Wilkins obviously would be amazing. I think that's like a trendsetter. That's the guy you're looking for to really help fix that and fortify that defensive line and that disruptor I was talking about earlier. But I don't know if they have the money, especially if you want to try to bring back Hunter. I don't see that as like an option, and I don't know if I see Miami letting him go either. We'll see how that plays out. I know their cap situation is pretty tricky too, but I think we could see like the Byron Murphy Jr. type, the Marcus Davenport type signings where you find that like $8 to $10 million range guy, but who's good, who's coming off their rookie contract, a guy that or maybe is in their like later 20s, but they're they haven't quite hit that mark yet. That's kind of been Kwesi's market, is like the guys coming right after the rookie deals, that like 26, 27, 28-year-old range. guys that you can build on for the next, handful of years, not just a 1-year stopgap. I think Marcus Davenport was a little bit more of like a misnomer. That's not really a trend that like to go with, but they know they needed to fill that position, and that was probably they could probably only get him on a 1-year deal at terms that were comfortable with. So I think they kind of would prefer to do like the short 2-year, 3-year type deals, but get guys that they can rely on for those 2 to 3 years as well. So that they can hit while they hit their prime, that 26, 27, 28-year-old prime for a lot of these guys is important. So I would love to see that kind of move. Maybe go get 2 guys. I like Jonathan Bullard as much as the next guy, but maybe it's time to you can't rely on, you got to stop letting these guys be your staple forces on defense though. Like Jonathan Bullard's has been a solid player for the Vikings, but he's not a staple. He's not a guy that you should be seeing play 700, 800 snaps. He's a depth, NFL, replacement level player. And that I'm not trying to say, that's no slight to him, but that's just kind of where he is. You should be trying to find a guy a step above that at the worst. And so if they can do that and then still find a guy in the drafts on day 2, early day 3, I think that's where they should really be focusing.
So one Gauges on YouTube says, I want an Aaron Donald type interior guy with our first pick. And, Aaron Donald's a first ballot Hall of Famer, just an insane game wreck or two at his position. Is there a can't miss? I mean, is there a can't miss defensive tackle that maybe is not on the Aaron Donald Hall of Fame path, Forno, but is there anyone in the draft that maybe is going to be like a game record type like Donald is at a defensive tackle, or is this more of a weaker class or more of just a depth class with not a lot of high ceiling?
Look, I'm going to be honest with you. I understand the premise of the question, and I understand kind of what they're looking for and talking about. But we also have to remember that Aaron Donald's probably one of the biggest outliers in the history of the NFL draft. Dude was small coming out, and there were really, really big questions about whether he could succeed in the NFL playing on the interior. Like, we're talking John Randall small. And just like John Randall, he just ended up being the biggest outlier because he ended up being just an alpha and great in almost every sense of the word. So to ask for that, this is what I mean. Like, I understand the premise of the question. Who could potentially be a game wrecker? I really don't think you're going to find somebody even close to Aaron Donald in this class. But if you want somebody who can come in, be a penetrator, be a guy who's versatile, play multiple spots on the line, I think Jer'Zhan Newton from Illinois is probably that guy. He's 6'2", about 295, and he can rush off the edge if you need him to. I'm not talking like a wide 9, but if you want to put him at like right over the tackles, a 5 tech, he can do that, and he can bend a little bit. He's got some explosiveness. You do worry a little bit about leverage, strength. He got doubled and tripled a lot at Illinois, and he really did struggle in those situations. So if he comes into situations where he's dealing with stunts and stuff, that could become an issue in the National Football League. So I don't think he's a surefire slam dunk. Wouldn't shock me if he goes top 10. I know Dane Brugler and Daniel Jeremiah, 2 NFL draft analysts who are very plugged in, mocked him towards the end of the first round, whereas the rest of the media kind of feels he's a little further up. Well, when they talk about something, you really have to take notice because that kind of information is mainly coming from NFL teams and is a little less opinion based and more reality based, so to speak. So I'm going to be very intrigued. Byron Murphy, he was a late bloomer, and that's the big worry with him. How much of him being a late bloomer, when you're 23 years old and you're whipping the butt of a 19-year-old kid, all right, sure. But if you're a 20-year-old and you're not whipping the butt of the 18, 19-year-old kid, then you start having more questions. This is why the late bloomer can be a little bit of a red flag, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's like a death sentence or anything. It's a part of the picture. And I haven't dove headfirst into Murphy, but the flashes I've seen live are really, really good. And he is explosive and he's able to be that interior pass rusher. But if you want that Aaron Donald-esque type, the quickness, the ability to play multiple spots in that arch type role, it's Jer'Zhan Newton.
I thought Murphy was a junior, 21 coming out. I didn't think he was older.
I know he's a Senior Bowl guy.
From what I've seen, I think he's an underclassman Senior Bowl.
Okay, that might be where I goofed because, either way, he really didn't burst onto the scene until this year. I just thought he was older.
No, from what he's a junior. Came in in 2021, so he's a true junior.
Okay, so Forno, You did a mock draft at Vikings Wire, and actually, let's kind of start in the middle of this draft and work our way on the outside and inside, because you have a couple defensive tackles in this 7-round mock, which you can find, by the way, at Vikings Wire. You have a couple middle round picks going to the Vikings in the defensive tackle realm, starting at pick 108 with Florida State defensive tackle Braden Fiske. You did a little bit of a write up here. He's quick off the ball and has power in his hands with a great motor, but again, he's a little undersized, which is something we've been talking a little bit about. What do you think of his potential with the Vikings, especially as a 4th round pick type of guy?
I like this as a 4th round pick because he's got an incredible motor and he really got better throughout the course of this season. But you do have some issues, and that's why you're going to get a guy like him in the 4th round. What I've noticed with a lot of these nose tackle types is they're coming in around 300, 310 pounds. And that doesn't necessarily work for how the Vikings want to play defense. It's one of the reasons why Harrison Phillips is playing out of position. He's the same archetype of player, same body like size. You want that bigger guy who can really be a run stuffer with a little bit of athleticism and quickness to be able to dart from gap to gap. And Fiske, I think, is a high motor guy. And one thing I've noticed with 4th round picks, you're going to get 3 types of players. You're going to get the high motor guy without the super high athletic upside. You're going to get the super high athletic upside with very little production, or you're going to get the guy who's just a stud that falls either due to off the field stuff or injuries. Like Josh Sweat was in that bucket. 4th round pick of the Eagles. He ended up signing a big extension. Has been a really good edge rusher for him. People thought his knees were going to be dust in 2 years like Brandon Roy. So that's why he ended up falling when he was a 1st round caliber player. So I think Fiske falls into the bucket where he's got the production, but I worry a little bit about the athletic upside. I worry about him just having to time snaps rather than just be super quick, because you want to trust athleticism more than you want to trust some of those little intangibles like that. We're not talking leadership or anything. We're talking just how you play the game on the field, because athleticism will translate, but some of those intangibles, you're playing against better competition. That's not going to always translate 1-to-1. So I like Fiske, and I think that's about the right spot for him.
Miles, what do you think of Jaquelin Roy taking that other step that we talked about at the top of the show, where he's a rookie, now he's a 2nd-year player? If, Forno's going to be having a couple maybe project or depth guys, maybe I should say, that he's drafting this year, do you look at least early on and before OTAs and minicamp and everything takes place, do you think Jaquelin Roy is someone they're probably going to be counting on to maybe try to earn a starting spot for 2024?
I mean, I think they're going to have to. I don't like going into seasons and off seasons, or I guess into the following like training camp, where like young guys have to come in to step in a role. But I think they're in a position where I don't think they're going to have enough cap space to completely refill everything in 1 year. It's going to be a multi-year process to kind of revamp this defense completely. So I think guys like Jaquelin Roy are you like need them to step up and come in and go into training camp as like maybe a number 2 guy who is pushing for a number 1 role. Like those are the types of things you want to see from your 2nd round or your 5th round pick in year 2. I don't know if he'll ever be a guy that you can fully rely on, but I kind of have the hope that I think there's some small flashes there. And maybe we'll see how he does in the offseason, how he can build off of it. A lot of work to be done. Again, I'm not saying I'm like going into it like super confident he'll be a guy that you can rely on, but I think you might have to go into the offseason with the expectation of him being one of your top interior guys going into training camp, and hoping he can continue to push for a role.
So you also have Forno Tyler Davis here out of Clemson, also going pick 130 here for the Vikings. So another kind of similar type of write-up to concerns with some explosiveness, again, slightly undersized, but is it just kind of putting as many guys as a dart throw and putting as many guys in a bag to kind of hope and see with Roy and Tyler Davis and obviously Fiske that maybe one of these guys emerges as a starter for the Vikings in 2024?
Yeah. I also don't think it's quite that simple either. We're going to learn a lot about how the Vikings are going to approach the NFL draft. And I think the way I approach these mock drafts is I like to explore situations, and we're going to look at how the first round shaped up here in a little bit and why the Vikings are taking a couple shots at defensive line here later, because and NFL teams do this too. You have to do a lot of mock draft simulations. Okay, well, what happens if this guy's on the board and all these guys go? How are we going to approach this? So when all of a sudden you're on the clock with only 10 minutes to make a decision, you're not scrambling, oh, we didn't prepare for this. How are we going to handle this? And that's what these mock drafts are for. They're not to be predictive. They're to understand, okay, this happened. What happens if we do this? And how does it impact the rest of the draft? How does it impact how the Vikings could possibly approach this? And come April, I'll do some predictive stuff. But right now, it's just about exploring possibilities, exploring situations. And I think if you're not going to get a defensive lineman in free agency, which right now we don't have because it's January, and if you're not going to get one in the first 2 rounds, it's almost better to take multiple guys in round 4 because you can get some upside and you can get some real production early on and at least rotational guys with the idea that, hey, maybe they can be something more. And at worst, you're hoping that they're that rotational guy. Think of James Lynch. James Lynch was taken. He was the high production, low athletic upside guy. He was fine. He was a stalwart player, and he probably would have been a starter for this team if he didn't tear his ACL in that first night practice. Like that's what you're getting, and you're hoping they can maybe turn into an Everson Griffin, a Ray Edwards, a Brian Robinson, where they're a long-term or at least like longer short-term starter for this team and making a really big impact. Like that's what you're looking for from these guys. The potential to get the upside, but at the very least, they're contributors. And I think having 2 options like Davis and Fiske, and I think they can play across the line a little bit like Jaquelin Roy, because when Roy was drafted, he had potential to maybe go in the first round. The Vikings were actually mocked him in the first round in May of 22 by Bleacher Report because he had that high upside. And all the defensive changes of Brian Kelly, and we now know that LSU's defensive structure, as not the talent as far as the coaching, is just garbage because they're massively underutilizing what they have. Like maybe you can get more out of Roy in year 2, but you took him in round 5. You weren't expecting him to be great off the bat, but you'd like to be able to see him take a step forward. But with the unknown of free agency, if things were to shape out as they did in this mock draft, taking a couple guys is a smart play.
Okay, so let's go to the top of the draft here. So with the 11th pick in the draft, Tyler Fornes, with the first selection in this draft, selects in this mock wide receiver Malik Neighbors out of LSU. Now, you mentioned that very unlikely he'll probably be here, but if the top quarterbacks are gone and he is still on the board, that you probably can't pass up a talent like that, even if wide receiver is a position that the Vikings are at a little bit of strength right now with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and whatnot. And Forno, I know you did a write-up on him, but Miles, just quick, if Neighbors is on the board, do you have to run to the board and take it right away, or are you trading back? What would you do in that scenario if a talent like that is on the board at 11?
I mean, you're talking to the offensive guy here, the guy that the receiver. Like I'm all for taking receiver. The one thing I will say is like I have a hard time seeing it. I wouldn't disagree with it by any means. I'm all for taking weapons. You should always have weapons. I think the more high end weapons you have, the better opportunity you have to win. But what wouldn't surprise me is if in that scenario, a team's really trying to trade up and they're willing to maybe overpay to get up to that spot to take Neighbors. And you have Addison and JJ, who hopefully by the draft is locked in long term, or if not, by training camp. But one of the only reasons I could see that really being like a scenario, I would be worried if this was the case, but maybe JJ's not happy. That type of scenario happens. I don't like to speculate. I don't think that's going to happen. JJ doesn't seem like that type of guy. I think it's too early for all that. But that in that scenario, the Vikings go get a wide receiver to cover their bases. But Neighbors is so good, so it'd be really hard to say no to that. But in that scenario, I really do think I could see Kwesi taking the highest bidder and someone overpaying to kind of move up to get Neighbors, and you move back. But I'm all for it. Again, you'll never hear me complain about taking wide receiver, no matter how many we have. Give me the playmakers and roll.
And Forno, you're good with this. If he's on the board, you would probably have to make this selection as well.
Yeah. Look, if Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't exist, Malik Neighbors would be wide receiver 1 in this class with pretty comfortably. I love Romo Dunze, but Neighbors gives you a little bit of everything. He can attack the ball. He can stack as he goes deep and really give that little bit of element of separation, tracks the ball well in the air. He and Jaden Daniels were absolutely lethal on slot fades this year. It was Daniels' favorite route to throw, and Neighbors just made it so easy for him to lay it in there. And he's explosive after the catch. He can do a little bit of everything. And he does it at a very, very high level. I gave him a comfortable first-round grade. I believe he's the number 1 or number 2 player on my board right now, but I only stack guys I've watched in full. So that'll probably end up changing when I get to the Caleb Williams, the Drake Mays, the Marvin Harrison Jr.'s. But the idea of taking Neighbors at 11, which I don't think he's going to end up being there, but in this simulation, he was. Mm-hmm. And if you have a talent like that, you just don't pass them up. Remember, the Vikings in 2007 didn't need a running back. They saw Adrian Peterson as this generational type player, so they took him. Mm-hmm. The Vikings did so with Randy Moss in 98. They had Jake Reed and Chris Carter, multiple 1,000-yard seasons back to back. They took him anyways. Mm-hmm. If you find a guy that's just that good, you take him and figure the rest out later. Plus, free agency is for filling needs. The draft is for acquiring talent. We could be looking at a situation where they've already filled the majority of their needs and they can feel comfortable. And now if they find that guy, we just have a casual top 5 player in the draft fall to 11. All right, let's just take him. Yeah. I mean, that situation, you're going to have multiple offensive linemen go in the top. You're going to have multiple quarterbacks go before the Vikings. So you're looking at a situation that would be advantageous for the Vikings to be able to make a selection like that because they don't have the ability to go get those guys. And adding Neighbors to the fold where, let's be honest, wide receiver is a need anyways. Not a super high need. I ranked it 7th out of all the needs the Vikings have, but you have to have that third guy in this offense. And right now they don't. Jalen Naylor's a massive question mark after an injury-laden year. Brandon Powell played well, but do you want to trust him as a full-time wide receiver 3? Probably not. KJ Osborne, I just don't think is good enough to warrant the contract he's going to get in free agency. So I would personally move on from him. And you need a guy. So you're technically still filling a need. And you're getting a guy that's just got a super high ceiling. So if you take that quarterback, say in round 2 or move back up, now you have another piece to make that transition for him to come into the NFL that much easier because you have 3 really good wide receivers, Hawk when he comes back, and bookend tackles with an overall solid offensive line. Feels weird to say that, but the Vikings have a good offensive line. And now you fix running back and let's go.
Wouldn't shock me at all if they fielded calls at that position either. I wouldn't be shocked if teams are buzzing up up the phone and if the
Malik
Vikings
Neighbors is at 11, like that dude's a top 10 pick in almost every draft. And if he makes it to 11,
I could 100% see them probably even. I wouldn't want to be in a situation where you're moving back like a ton, but yeah, you're gonna get a lot of calls, and if you get an offer that you can't refuse, you absolutely kind of run with it. In round 2, Forno, and we've talked about this one a lot. So you have J.J. McCarthy, Michigan quarterback, going to the Vikings at pick 42. And now I've seen mocks that have him in the first round. I've seen them out of the first round. He kind of seems, that Will Levis type that we've brought up before multiple times on Purple Daily on Draft. But I feel like, again, if he's there, like this just seems just like a no-brainer. Take your quarterback of the future. Let him develop. You probably re-signed Kirk in this scenario too. I know you didn't really touch on that in this mock draft necessarily, but you probably have at least a bridge guy or Kirk Cousins back if you're taking J.J. McCarthy in the second round.
Yeah, and you really hit the nail on the head with the Levis comp. They're not the same player, but I think that the range and how people view Will Levis and J.J. McCarthy are going to be in a similar spot. I don't think people are going to have him as a top 10 pick like they did Will Levis. Some people were talking about him going like first or second overall. I don't see that with McCarthy. I didn't see that with Levis. I had a second round grade on him because I just didn't know how he'd be able to utilize his tools with any form of consistency. And that was the biggest question. And that was the biggest question with Josh Allen. And look at what Josh Allen's become. He's still turning the ball over 20 times, but he's carrying that Bills team consistently. So with McCarthy, it's about developing the rest of his game because Michigan didn't. Michigan didn't because they didn't need to. They wanted to run the football, play great defense, and then when they needed McCarthy to be McCarthy, he was. But they never really allowed him to shine, which is why I thought he needed to leave Michigan. And it's probably best to sit at least half the season, maybe the full year, and just get his bearings underneath him, learn from a veteran that just show him the little nuances of the NFL, clean up some of that footwork. But he can do some of the things that you already need him to do. He can do play action. He can move. He can throw on the run. He can throw with confidence and accuracy down the middle. He loves throwing the seam ball, and he's very good at it. So you look at some of the positives with him. It's just about letting him doing it and letting him do it with consistency. That's going to be the key in unlocking what he can be, because Michigan stifled him based on how they wanted to play, not who McCarthy was. And I think that's a big difference with him and Bo Nix. Bo Nix wasn't allowed to do a lot of those things because he couldn't, in my opinion. McCarthy wasn't allowed to do them because they just wanted to play a different brand of football. And I think that's where context really becomes king in these situations, in trying to decipher who is the right choice. And if McCarthy's there, I think you jump on him, because he can run this style of offense. He can do full field reads, and you can utilize his legs. But he's not a guy who wants to run. And I think that's when you're talking about dual threats, that's something to note as well. He can run. He doesn't want to. And I think that's a massive benefit for what O'Connell really wants to do, and that's attack down the field.
So, Miles, in this mock from Forno, he has Rutgers quarterback Max Nelton going at pick 148. Is pick 148 too late to identify cornerback? Are you good waiting to pick up a corner at this point? I mean, Mekhi Blackman might take a step. There was ebbs and flows, the Caleb Evans. But cornerback's always a position that the Vikings are looking to grab. Is pick 148 too late? Would you have rather seen the Vikings take a cornerback earlier in the draft if this mock played out like it does?
I mean, again, it's so hard without free agency and things, but I do think cornerback is the one position I think we're what's the word I'm thinking of? Like, I think we're underrepresenting, could be in the first round if they don't go quarterback. I think a shutdown cornerback is one of the things that Brian Flores would love the most, because I think he knows how important it could be to help everything else on that defense. And they don't have a lockdown corner. They don't have a true number one. I think Byron Murphy Jr. is a really good corner, but he's not like a traditional one. He's a good nickel who can play on the outside. And then the other guys they have just aren't proven. I think they can continue to build off of Caleb Evans, but I don't think I also don't think he's like you could turn him into your true number one outside corner. I think he's a good, average to maybe slightly below average cornerback, and I don't think there's a problem with that. He's a 4th round pick. And then Andrew Booth, we got no idea. So I think that's just the one position where they could really look to really try to find that 1A guy. But so I would have a hard time if it was that late, but I think you do have guys. So it's not like you have nobody. It's not like the defensive line where like the cupboard is literally bare. There are guys that you can work around, and adding a few guys for competition and depth is important. And so maybe you don't go the route of trying to find that number one. You just continue to throw bodies at it. I kind of like the way the Packers have with wide receiver. It's not like focusing on one guy to be the true number one. It's let's get a few guys and let them kind of battle it out and see who ends up taking those jobs. And I think that could be a good spot for the Vikings at corner.
Forno, running back Ray Davis from Kentucky, who also spent time at Temple and Vanderbilt. You have him going to the Vikings at pick 160. With Ty Chandler, Alexander Madison, we'll see what kind of the future holds for Madison, but at least for Davis, he ran for almost 1,100 yards, 14 touchdowns last year. Is another day 3 running back an option, just like they kind of did with DeWayne McBride last year?
Yeah, I think running back's an option pretty much anywhere in this draft other than round 1. I think if you make a trade to get another 2nd round pick or move back in round 2, I think you could potentially see one in round 2. You're going to hear a lot about Wisconsin's Braylon Allen. I really don't think he's a fit for this team. Yeah, he is like 6'2", 238. He can't move laterally. He's not a guy you're going to ever want to use in wide zone. And I just think because of that profile, he's not going to be a fit here. Davis, I like as a fit. All you need to do to see the best of Davis is turn on the tape against my Florida Gators. Just absolutely pounded them for 4 quarters. It was like an unfair boxing match where one guy's just beating the crap out of the other one. It was truly impressive. He's got the physical ability. He can play in zone schemes because at Kentucky, you're playing in essentially a Kyle Shanahan offense. So he's going to be able to understand a lot of what the Vikings are trying to do. He's got good vision. He's got the ability to break tackles, and he's got enough juice to be able to break out long runs. I don't think he has that top tier gear, which I don't really care about that much. Yeah, you'd like to see a 70-yard run for a touchdown. Nobody's complaining if you go for 50, 55. And with running backs, it's more about getting those consistent intermediate games than bursting out the long one. So if he's getting a bunch of 10, 15-yard gains, that's going to do a lot more for you with consistency than getting one or two of those 70-yard touchdowns. And I think that's what Davis can provide. All I know is this: you cannot go into next year with just Ty Chandler and Alexander Madison and feel good about your running back room.
Yeah.
Madison has everything up here. His body can't always cash those checks. Chandler's body can cash those checks, but he doesn't have everything with the vision, the decision-making, and all the mental stuff that comes with playing the running back position to be the guy as of yet. Will he ever develop it? I don't know. But giving him the opportunity to earn that job, I think, is a good idea. You just need to figure out how you're going to address the room by making it better. And I think Davis could.
Rounding out this mock draft here, just the last 3 picks in it, you have Colorado tight end Dallin Holker going to the Vikings at 165. Austin Booker, the former Gopher from Kansas, as an edge guy going to the Vikings at 179. And then Florida Gator Kingsley, is it Uwakun?
Aguakun, I think, is how you pronounce it.
Aguakun, who's a swing guy. He can play center, he can play guard, he can just be a depth guy for you. Austin Booker, though, I mean, Miles, I don't know how much Gopher football you watch, but an edge not until also round 6 or round 7, right? And then this one, I pick 179. Austin Booker, former Gopher, I don't know if you watched any of his tape or saw him play at the University of Minnesota too. Is this someone that you'd maybe be interested in day 3 for the Vikings?
I mean, the Gophers' defense this year was really good. I think that's the one thing that we know. I think that's one thing that you could be confident with that they were able to do this year, because they didn't do a lot of other things well, especially on offense. So I got no problem with it. I'm all for taking the hometown guy. I think he's worthy of a draft pick this year. I haven't watched enough of him to have a truly informed opinion, but I think from that defensive side, I think there's a few guys that I wouldn't be surprised to get drafted this year. So especially the safety
Tyler
Newbin, thank you.
Yeah, he'd be really good.
He's obviously a top 2 round guy, but I'd have no problem with it. The defense was really good. I think they were versatile, and I think that was the one bright spot of this team, of the Gophers team last year. So yeah, I mean, I would like to take edge earlier, because it's one position that you truly again, we talk about cupboards bare. That one's probably might even be worse than your defensive line. It's close. But we'll see. Obviously, we'll see how things shake out in free agency and whatnot. But yeah, I'm all for it.
Don't feel bad about not seeing enough of Booker, Miles. He played, I think, 20 snaps at the U, and he's played less than 600 his entire college career. The dude is he's got arms as long as vines and athleticism.
Hey,
what do you do with those dudes?
Yeah, you just take a shot on him and see if you can hit something. I'm all for it. The freaks on D3, go for it.
Freaks.
Our next Day of Runa, baby. Let's go.
Love that. Geeks and freaks and geeks. Honestly, great show too. Forno, you're at the Senior Bowl next week, correct? That's a week from today.
Yes, sir. I will be flying to Mobile with our good buddy Thor on Monday. Be flying back Friday. It's funny. Okay. Our arrival time on Monday and our departure time on Friday are the exact same. That's just a funny coincidence. I think it's hilarious.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, so we're going to have some great takes from the Senior Bowl. We'll that won't be coming at you probably for a couple weeks, but Forno will have boots on the ground there at least, so we'll have some takes from that as well. So hit that subscribe button for daily Vikings entertainment. This is Purple Daily on Draft. We appreciate you guys for listening.